Here's Garry Davis.
World citizen number one, Garry Davis.
Garry Davis.
Garry Davis.
Garry Davis.
Garry Davis.
Garry Davis.
Who, me?
You are about to hear from an everyday man with an extraordinary life story. He was an actor, a song and dance man who leapt off the Broadway stage onto the world stage in 1948, taking on cops, border guards, armies, and whole nations, showing us that we don't have to be awed by their props of power and control. For 65 years, as a citizen of no nation, only the world, Garry Davis made his own props of freedom, demonstrating that we, the people, can tear down the walls of oppression and write our own story. We can build a world that is constructive for all and destructive to none. A world in which all of us can truly say, the world is my country.
Pacifica Radio, our national show. We have been around for about a year. We usually do audio only, but today we have this opportunity to also do some video. And we also have the pleasure of having with us Arthur Kanegis, filmmaker, director, and the culprit behind what we just saw, the film, the documentary film, The World is My Country. Arthur, I'd like to start out, well, first of all, welcome to COVID, Race and Democracy.
Yes, I love being on Pacifica.
Great. And we'll talk more about that. But first, I'd like to ask you the following. So there is a worldwide understanding of the power of nonviolence. You know, figures like Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr. at the center of it. Did Mr. Garry Davis have something like that in mind when he proposed a citizens movement to take control of important affairs of all countries?
Yes, I think very much so. I think that Garry, as Garry says in the movie, he says, here's something very interesting he mentioned. First of all, as you know, if you get to see the movie, he went on an incredible journey from being a song and dance man to this incredible spark that helped set off a huge movement in post-war Europe with Einstein and Camus and all these other people in it, that demanding that the UN recognize the rights of humanity and creating the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. But what he realized was that the nation states weren't going to fix it, that it's really up to we the people, that, he said, we're just hitting our heads against the wall trying to beg and plead these government leaders to make peace when they're on the wrong civic level. Their loyalties to the part, not the whole. So in the movie, he makes an incredible kind of discovery, and that is that if the Constitution says it is the right of the people to institute new government, not the Constitution, excuse me, the U.S. Declaration of Independence says it is the right of the people to institute new government. That's reflected in almost every constitution that is supposed to be based on the will of the people. It's even in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights for the whole planet. And yet, the will of the people has no expression at the global level. In fact, there's no governance at the global level. In every single country on earth, it's illegal to kill people. It's not outside. You get medals for it. They call it war. They can torture people. They can do all these things. They can set up right off Guantanamo Bay because a few miles outside our limits, anything is allowed that would never be allowed inside those limits. So he said, why don't we, the people, just go ahead and do that? Who were they talking about when they said we had the right to institute new government? Old guys in gray wigs, or did they really mean you and I? And if we do, why don't we just go ahead and do it? So he took the first step. He said he declared a government of, by, and for the people of the world. Now, he laughs when he says he did that. He says, but I did it. And I went down to Washington and I set up an office that still to today puts out world passports and world IDs. And, it's the beginning of creating a world citizen government. And so what he said is that, and relating to your question of nonviolence, is that there are several key elements to nonviolence. As you know, with the civil rights movement in the South, for example, here the United States went from, I mean, I remember when I was young, my parents were very involved in early civil rights, and Black people couldn't get a drink of water at the same lunch counter. They couldn't they couldn't. You know, my parents would take kids from the ghetto around to the Lincoln Memorial and the Washington Monument. They couldn't stop and use the bathroom or anything. It was crazy. And yet what changed that were three things. One was the power of nonviolence. How do we go from that to actually having a Black president, for example, and having a current administration where there's such a rich diversity of people in it? And the key is three things. One, that the movement was nonviolent. If every time a Black church was bombed, they had bombed a white church. Every time a Black person got hung, they would have lynched a white person. That still could be going on. We see that in the Middle East. It goes on for thousands of years. You did this, I'm going to do this. You did that, and it never ends. But because Martin Luther King traveled to India, learned Gandhi's path, and had the power of nonviolence, he was able to do the key element of that shift. But that wouldn't have worked without the second element, which is media. And that is, if the whole world hadn't been watching, if they had done that in Mississippi and there were no TV cameras and we didn't see that all over the world, and that didn't bring kids from all over the world going down to the South to help, it wouldn't have worked because nobody would have known. And the third key element was law, that once then out of that, we were able to create the Civil Rights Act of 1954, and we were able to say, no, you can't block the schoolhouse, you can't not let, you can't stop block integration. You had the power of law enforcing that people have rights. Now, we see sometimes that law fails. They're still trying to find ways to get around the law and try to block voting rights for Blacks and things like that, but they're scampering. And how do we do it within a law system that's trying to stop us from doing that? And so those three elements are the key to nonviolence, really, and that is, you need the power of nonviolence from individuals, you need media, and you need the law. And Garry is saying, well, why do we have to stop that law at the national level that's so darn broken? All over the world, we see nations violating the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, not honoring their obligation to grant rights and freedoms to all the people of the planet, because they're not granting it. That's the wrong word. We inherently have them. That's what the Declaration of Independence says. And the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. We already have those rights. We're just supposed to block government from taking them away. So government can be a wonderful power if it's in our service, if it's creating laws that serve the people. When it becomes oppressive of people, then you have to do civil disobedience and so on. You have to block it. So how do we get those aligned? And Garry's key mission as he evolved in his life was to figure out, how do we align, how do we the people create a people-powered planet where we are the ones who are not in this win-lose democracy, a race to the bottom, the most ignorance, but a race to the top where we bring up the highest and best wisdom of each individual. That was his kind of goal at the end of his life and his mission.
Certainly, and you were friends with him, right?
Oh, I knew Garry for 25 years. We worked together on evolving many of the ideas, over a quarter century of how we do this people-powered planet. That was my main passion in life, was also to figure out, how do we engineer peace? My dad brought me up, to be a peace engineer, my dad and mom together. And I loved physics. I could have gone and invented new things. I'm always inventing little things, but I said, the world doesn't need another physical invention. We need to invent a better way of governing our world, or we're toast. That's the end. Nuclear war or environmental destruction is the end of life on Earth. If we don't use the fact that we've evolved some kind of intelligence and heart and empathy, if we don't use that evolution in a way that we apply it to how we manage our planet, if we just use it for inventions, we're toast. We've got to find a way to come together as a planet and bring out the best of each of us. And that's why I have I produced this, this movie that's out on over 100 public broadcasting stations across the country now, that's getting just pouring in amazing reactions from audience, their comments. And we're on the path to having an ongoing podcast where we we work to invent with other people. How do we invent this people-powered planet?
The World is My Country is the documentary film that we're discussing today. Arthur Kanegis is our guest. Arthur, since the end of World War II, Mr. Garry Davis, this first world citizen, right, showed a determination to carry on with this plan to mobilize citizens around the world. At that very moment, the US government and its military were standing tall after having dropped 2 nuclear bombs, one on Hiroshima, one on Nagasaki. Could really any social movement have had any effect at that time? A social movement from the bottom.
So social movements from the bottom have really been the key to shifts all along. You know, we have Mother's Day coming up, and Mother's Day all started with a wonderful Mother's Day proclamation for peace, and we're not going to let our sons be torn apart in war. I can't even quote it so beautifully said in the original poem, but look up that 1870 poem that started Mother's Day. It's really inspiring, and it's people's movements, the women's suffrage movement, and many of them were early advocates of creating some kind of a global governance system where we the people could be on top. All change happens from the bottom up, and yes, there's also countervailing forces. There's an incredible military-industrial complex. There was an incredible, the whole dropping of the bomb was basically, this whole power struggle. We want to put the U.S. in a prominent position after the war to be able to create a Pax Americana. That's the wrong kind of peace. As Garry says in the film, does world government scare you? He says, well, it does me too. It's the same old forces of power and money controlling our lives from behind closed doors. But what if we, the people, run it? And not mob rule, just, the majority is going to vote one way or the other. And then, that just gets crazy, race to the bottom. But a new system, he called it synergy, integrity, where which is synergy with integrity. It's this tensile strength of the geodesic sphere that brings out that puts each person on top and brings out the power and wisdom of each of us and evolves a new way of coming to bring to the top what is the will of the people at the global level, the true will. And our true will isn't to vote for Tweedledee or Tweedledum. It's because as he says in the film, he says we used to have to. It was a great invention in 1776 to send people by horse and buggy to meet in a distant room to govern for us. We don't need a middleman anymore. We, the people, can directly be involved. Here we are in these Zoom meetings, interactive, where we are interacting across all the political divides with a toolkit of a menu of things that help us bring together and find our humanity and reach synergy, which is one sense above consensus. It's something better comes out of it than any of us thought of when we first came into the chat, and have all these little groups coming together into creating the will of the people at the global level and creating a whole new hope for our planet.
Hopeful it certainly is. Let's go back to history for just a second. Eleanor Delano Roosevelt seemed to have an interesting relationship with Mr. Davis. You in your film, you show her say that, well, why doesn't he just then go ahead and start a government, a world government of his own in a friendly way? Now, if you go to Wikipedia, which is not necessarily a credible source, as I will tell my students as a teacher, but nevertheless, if you go to Wikipedia, it says that Eleanor Roosevelt was skeptical of Garry Davis's proposal. She called, and I'll quote, actually, I found this is My Day from Eleanor Roosevelt, the column that she published on December 15th, 1948, right? Garry Davis, I'll quote, this is New York Tuesday. Garry Davis, the young man who is in Paris as a citizen of the world, does something every few days that causes amusement among those who know well what little value this type of flash in the pan publicity is. And I'm end quote. Now, flash in the pan publicity. If I'm not mistaken, one person that found this kind of flash in the pan publicity worth sponsoring was Yves Saint Laurent of Yves Saint Laurent fame. So how did Garry Davis kind of find himself in a place where an actor, right, turned soldier, turned dissenter, refusenik, crazy person perhaps, according to some, then all of a sudden in the eye of the hurricane, and also taken up by serious people like Eleanor Delano Roosevelt, or like maybe the people that were at the time figuring out what the world would look like after the horrors of World War II?
All right. Well, excellent question, and I'm glad you did your research. Yes, that was a very interesting column. Okay, so first, to give your listeners a little background, what happened was that after Garry went to Paris and declared himself a citizen of the world, officially gave up national citizenship in any nation. He said he did it out of love for America. He gave up national citizenship because in order to survive, we have to be global citizens. And after this riveted, war-weary Europe, and 20,000 people rallied with him at the Velodrome, demanding the UN recognize the rights of humanity, including in his rally Albert Camus and Simone de Beauvoir and all these famous French intellectuals, Sartre and so on. Anyway, after they had this incredible. After he leapt up in the middle of a UN session, this is where we should talk about the flash dependent. He interrupted the session, and in a way reminiscent of what Greta's done, although she didn't interrupt, she got invited there. But he leapt up and he pulled off this act of political theater because he was an actor, and he said, "The nations you represent divide us and lead us to the brink of total war. What we need is one government for one world, and if you won't do it, step aside. And a people's world assembly will arise from our ranks to do it." And that's what he was talking about later stage of this life. How does that people's world assembly do it? Now, Eleanor Roosevelt's reaction was that 4 days after Garry did that, she wrote a very interesting column. Here she is, the wife of the president. She's the US official delegate to the United Nations. She's heard Garry say this, and her article is a very interesting tightrope act because on the one hand, she can't come out, oh yeah, this guy's got a good point. But even while she says flash in the pan publicity, here he jumps up, gets all this publicity. She also said, surprisingly, he's gotten major people to support him, like Albert Einstein. She mentions that right in the article. Now, if she was really putting him down, she wouldn't tell people that Albert Einstein supported him. And then she goes on in that article to say, well, of course, the United Nations is not set up to be a government. It's a place where nations talk, because if they weren't talking and letting off steam, they'd be throwing bombs back and forth. So this will let them do that, but we're not a government, so you can't ask us to do that. And then she closed with this incredible statement, which blew Garry's mind. She said, how much better it would be if Mr. Davis would start then and there a worldwide international government. And she goes on to talk about how people could be loyal to that, whatever. Well, I think that she was walking a tightrope of, on the one hand, chiding him, and on the other hand, kind of giving a signal. Hey, look, if you and your cohorts really think this should happen, go ahead and do it. If we the people create government, do it. So I think she was kind of signaling him, sure, go ahead. At the same time, she couldn't, come out officially and endorse him. Here she's in this powerful position, but it was still a phenomenal statement, and it blew Garry's mind. And he actually finally ended up, getting the courage to do that. It took a long spiritual journey to do that. He had to go study with a guru and other things that happened when he went through his life. You'll see that whole life turmoil when you see the movie. But people can see it. They can go to theworldismycountry.com. They can, even if it's not on, you'll see a list when you click on public TV of when it's on public TV in your area. If you've missed it or it's not there, you can also it talks about how you can help encourage your station to show it, or you can also just get a ticket right there online to watch it, and you can do it right from our website. So people can watch theworldismycountry.com, this phenomenal story that kind of shakes up our way of thinking.
And I've already seen it twice online for free, and I'm grateful to you, Arthur Kanegis, for making this available to us. Now, maybe even a little bit deeper. So Garry Davis was also supported by movements like the World Federalist Movement, and we're talking about a series of intellectuals. You mentioned them, right? Albert Einstein, Mahatma Gandhi, and others. But the Federalist Movement later, which was founded in 1937 by famous feminists, pacifists, female suffragists, but then later got, in my opinion, perhaps, or in some critics' opinion, co-opted by what is now known as the humanitarian doctrine, or the responsibility to protect. And now that we're in a post-Trump world, and we're here at Pacifica, right? Pacifica Radio, our responsibility is to examine the root causes of conflicts, and to contribute to a lasting understanding and to eventually world peace. So I think this conversation is very important. But let's just see, what can we expect from the Biden administration? Many have said that Biden has brought on board people like Samantha Power, with the responsibility to protect, the idea that there is such a thing as a humanitarian war. If other countries, nations, which I know Garry Davis was against the idea of a nationhood itself, if nations violate the human rights of their own citizens, it's the responsibility of the great United States to go swoop in with their humanitarian bombs. What would Garry say about that today?
He would say that it's the right basic impulse that we need to have a humanitarian way to enforce law, but totally the wrong idea that some individual does it. It's like the Wild West, when there was no law, and if we wanted to enforce the law, we had to send out, a posse, and one group versus another group, or the Hatfields and McCoys. One group's going to punish the other group, and they're going to try to enforce the peace, and that just never works. Law has to be above all people. It has to apply to everybody, and that the United States should be the cops of the world. Well, yeah, the world does need a way to. We do need the cops of the world, but I think they should be trained in nonviolence and other alternatives. But they can't be from one country versus another. I mean, what gives the United States the right to tell other countries what they should do and how they should fix their humanitarian problems? One country can't do it to another. We have to all get together and create law at the global level that will do that. So when you see these terrible humanitarian injustices, you take it to court. I mean, let me give you one example. Costa Rica did something truly amazing. There's a wonderful film about it called Brave Peace, I think it's called. And what happened is, here they were in the 40s, surrounded by hostile military powers threatening them. And they're this little country. So what did they do? They got rid of their army, their military. They had no military. Well, then nobody could attack them. I mean, who was there to attack? You couldn't do it. And they've lasted now for like 70 years. Everybody's educated. They have 100% or 99%, renewable energy. People live happily, and they did it by getting rid of the military. Now, what happened when people threatened them? Well, when some other powers did threaten them, they took it to the world courts, as we have them. We have sort of world courts, and we have an inter-American court. They haven't been very effective because people don't use them.
But because the U.S., sorry to interrupt you, but because the U.S. doesn't recognize their authority.
Yeah, the UN screws over. But when they were attacked by other countries locally, or were starting to be threatened, they took it to the inter-American court and stuff. And people did enforce it, because here, here's this country without a military, they can't go enforce themselves. So other people kind of stepped in and said, yeah, we have to abide by that. So they began that first step of creating respect for world law. It's incredible. In our societies, we don't, we don't not kill our neighbor and not run through a light and do all this stuff because somebody's about to enforce it. We accept that this is our fundamental way of doing society. We stop at red lights, we do these other things. It becomes part of the culture. Law becomes part of the acceptable behavior. But if these lights were dropped in by some other country saying, you've got to stop at these lights or we'll shoot you, we would be rebelling against them. I mean, in other words, law has to come from the people. It has to be accepted part of our culture. It has to be something we all agree on. Law is the encoding of the will of the people. And if it's not the coding of the will of the people, it's not going to work.
I think pretty much any society would agree that without law, a society doesn't function. I believe there might be disagreements about the specific laws that will govern each group of people. I don't know. I mean, of course, the idea here is the universalist idea of a universal understanding of what law is. But I would say then law for whom? Because unfortunately, what we have seen in the 21st century, in the 20th century, and before, going all the way back to pretty much empires, to the history of humanity, law is written by the owners of property, by those who own the means of production. If you want, if you want to Wayne Marxist, I'm wondering, I'm curious, Garry.
Well, it's been kind of a struggle back and forth, and people have come up with laws to try to contain and control, the out of control corporations and powers, of course, and then they try to do their end. And right now they're on top because we the people are locked in these boxes called nation states. In other words, originally in Thomas Jefferson's day, corporations were under the people. That they got a 20-year charter. If they didn't serve a public good, like build a railroad, their charter could be pulled. But because we were in these boxes called nation states and they could operate globally, they came out on top. Well, you try to control our pollution, we'll move abroad. You try to tax us, we'll move abroad. Oh, no, please stay. And we became their servants. And then they got all the money to hire all our politicians, and now they've got so much money and that there's really democracy just becomes sort of almost like a shell, because they're actually, choosing the politicians, and the politicians can say anything they want. They can make beautiful statements. There's a wonderful film out about how all the incredible, every single president is given one. It's a film called Youth versus Gov, and it shows that almost every single president except Trump has acknowledged and fully recognized that our policies are destroying the future for these kids. And yet even though they've given that lip service, they still undertaking policies that serve the big oil interests and stuff that are destroying these kids' future. So they are suing the government for destroying their future, and actually having some success at several court levels, and it's still in the courts. But it's a fascinating movie, Youth versus Gov, Youth v. Gov. But anyway, it's always been a struggle, as you mentioned. It's been these grassroots groups and so on, and women, campaigning for women's rights when they weren't even allowed to vote and so on. So yes, the powers that be, will always be trying to use law on their part. But that's why Garry says we have to create a people-powered planet, because we the people have to get it together around the nation to create a more powerful law. And we're only going to do that. We can't do that when we're locked in the boxes called nation states. We can only do that by combining the power that people have around the world. And when we lift that veil that makes us think of ourselves as just, Americans or Russians or Afghanis or whatever we are, and we start seeing ourselves as citizens of the world, then we have incredible power to unleash the real superpower of the planet. And that is the people of the planet. We are the superpower.
Thank you for that. And just finally, at the end of the Cold War, it was clear to many people that the US, right, the United States, just like at the end of World War II, was all standing tall again, like a winner of the war, right? And the message was capitalism has won over communism. Do you think Garry Davis understood that when he attended the bringing down of the Berlin Wall? Was he clear that a unipolar world, a more aggressive empire was in the making? Given that now we're seeing this balance of power coming about with Russia and China and Iran and India, maybe on the one side, on several sides in the US, and it's a tremendous consolidation of control. I guess I have two questions, different questions. Let's just focus on maybe the the idea of the aggressivity of the empire in the making, but also you mentioned the consolidation of the control of mass media by a handful of corporations. How do you see a citizen movement spreading and winning the hearts and minds of the people of the world in order to govern the world from the ground up again, coming back to where we started?
Well, it's a big challenge. Of course, we're in that area. I mean, we got turned down by, all kinds of distributors and other people who, didn't want to see such a kind of, film that, while it gets incredible, riveting responses from audiences that see it, standing ovations when we showed it at film festivals. It does have a concept which can be scary to some of the powers that be. But we're happy that 100 public broadcasting stations have had the courage to run this and to get people thinking about this idea. And I think part of the reason they did that is because it's such a riveting story. It's not a propaganda piece that goes out there and says, rah, rah, we should do this. It's telling this incredible man's journey, carrying people with him on the journey, and out of the journey coming to the conclusion. What we've been talking about in this discussion is all like almost the last 5 or 10 minutes of the film. It's where Garry kind of started in seeing, out of his experience, how do we the people come out on top over empire? And back during if you read Garry's book, My Country is the World, you'll see that early on in his movement, he was taking it from both sides. Right in the movie, he mentions that when he gave up national citizenship and moved into the territory of world territory. See what happened is the UN had been turned over to the Palais des Chaillot in Paris was turned over to France for the duration of the session as international territory. So when he was ordered to leave France because he didn't have papers, he left by going to sleep on the steps of the Palais. Policeman said, oh, you have to get out of here. He said, if you push me back into France, you'll be guilty of importing an alien into France. I got to go get orders. Anyway, so the world press all gathered around him, but he offered himself to the UN. He said, okay, look, I'm your first citizen. Let's have citizens for the planet. Here I am, I'm your first citizen. And the Soviet representative said, Davis is a world baby. States may join, diapered citizens yet. And he was also accused by Pravda of importing world citizenship along with powdered eggs and ham or something like that. And the Americans, and detective stories, that's what it was. And then, he also took it from both sides. And Garry wasn't for either side. He wasn't for either ism. He wasn't for any of these empires. He was for we the people taking back our power. And you're right, there's all these power struggles in the world, and each empire starts with a kernel of a great idea, the beautiful idea, behind starting, communism was, we'll all be communal, we'll share. And yet then you see the incredible horrors of some of the things that happened under Stalin and so on, where, there's incredible oppression. The same thing in our country, in the US, where there was a kernel of a great idea, but then incredible, militaries all over the world, bombing peasants, doing all these things that are totally the opposite, overthrowing democratic governments, things that are the opposite of what that kernel of an idea was.
In the name of human rights.
Yeah,
right?
And the only way around that is for we the people to, really step up to the plate and to find a way to create a whole new, better governing system for our planet. And that was the kind of challenge he left us. He said, human beings are a very inventive species. Why do we have to be stuck in these old broken ideas? Let's think of some new ones. So he really thought outside all these boxes, whether it's the U.S. empire, the Russian empire, Chinese, all the other empires. He was thinking outside the box and down to the heart of we the people. How do we come together as a planet?
All right. Well, it's definitely worth watching, perhaps even more than once. Arthur Kanegis, tell us again how we can see the film.
Yes.
And any other thoughts. And then,
well, you can see the film by going to theworldismycountry.com. Just click on the public TV link or various places there on the site. You'll see more information. And also, if you go to peoplepoweredplanet.com, we started a weekly podcast where we struggle with exactly what Garry suggested. Okay, he said, let's figure out how to do that. And this is where we have speakers and people coming aboard, thinking about and talking about how do we evolve that. We've had people working on, we had Glenn Martin with the Earth Constitution. We have people working on holographic alternatives, working on, other ideas of how do we begin to evolve a better and new governing system that doesn't be such a race to the bottom, but a race to the highest and best in each one of us.
all right. If you have a couple of more minutes, it just occurred to me. the World Economic Forum has told us, well, for those of us who pay attention to those things, Charles Schwab of the World Economic Forum has said, well, now that the pandemic is about to be over, hopefully, well, we're initiating the Great Reset, right? And that's supposed to be a capitalism with a human face, a world government of sorts, and interaction among people in a way that will somehow overcome the inequalities, the tremendous inequalities, the horrors of war, and all of that good stuff. All of that, Charles Schwab of the Economic Forum tells us that this mysterious Great Reset will just somehow do it. What do you think?
Well, I go back to what I said before. It really has to start from the bottom up. Top down solutions are unlikely to work because their basic interest is coming from, how do we preserve and maintain our power and money? Mm-hmm. And there's democracy. I mean, capitalism, when it's tempered by, there certainly have been incredible advances that have come out of an interactive entrepreneurial system, but it has to be tempered by the will of the people shaping that and guiding it. And when it's out of control, when it gets over the people, then it can go amok. And so there needs to be a balance there. It's not like any one or the other, will work. It needs to be an interaction between, people at the top, people like that who do want to maybe get rid of inequality and so on, but it has to be tempered by a powerful citizens movement that guides it, or else it'll just be more manipulation and control of our lives. So we the people are the key to it all.
All right, folks, go ahead and join the citizens movement. The World is My Country is the film that we've been discussing today. The author is Arthur Kanegis, whom we thank very, very much. Arthur, thank you for being here on COVID, Race, and Democracy. And we look forward to seeing you with lots of success, and look forward to talking to you again here on Pacifica Radio National.
All right, thank you, and you have a wonderful day, and keep inspiring people. You're part of the voice of the people. That's part of what we need.
Arthur, thank you for that. And maybe if you can do a little plug for Pacifica Radio, well, for KPFK, we're in Los Angeles, and we're actually in the middle of a fund drive right now. So for some of our stations, we're going to have to ask you to cough up a few bucks. Arthur, help us do that. Why do we need to support independent radio?
Very, very supportive of independent radio. Garry went to the Pacifica Radio offices and had a wonderful interview there with Carrie Harrison, and you probably find that in your old archives. I mean, Garry passed away in 2013, but Pacifica has been one of the premier voices of freedom and of we the people having a voice in our affairs. So yes, do support Pacifica Radio by all means.
You heard Mr. Kanegis. Go do it. Thank you so much. Have a lovely day.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye-bye. Thank you.